Another day, and we have more sets of teasers. Today we're going to be talking about the ice changes, whether it be the new shadow transformations, the creatures, or even the shadow enhanced spells. We'll be covering all that in today's video. But just remember, the teasers were originally given to HJJ. Basically the video will be linked in the description, and you guys can go watch the original video and give them some support. I would appreciate that. It would mean a lot, of course, because these teasers were originally given to them, and of course you want to show your support to other content creators. But I'm going to be kind of bouncing off that idea and continuing upon their discussion on the spells and giving you guys my thoughts and opinions regarding all the ice changes. And then of course tomorrow we do have fire teasers, and then Sunday we do have storm teasers. So be on the lookout for all the other teasers. Essentially mine will be on Sunday, so we'll be talking about storm and giving you guys my thoughts and opinions on that. So be on the lookout for that later this upcoming week. But let's dive straight in and let's start talking about shadow packs and the changes, of course, when it comes to ice. So of course we'll toss up the graphic on screen explaining what shadow packs are. The system is already explained at the bottom, so if you are trying to understand how shadow packs work, just read the description where it talks about the system explained. Kind of summed it up, pretty straightforward and easy for you guys. But let's start talking about the shadow transformation first. We have the new Shadow Sentinel. Now this is a way better Sentinel than we already have in the game. So the current Sentinel, what it does is it intercepts and puts 80 block and minus 10 incoming. While this new one is putting 50% intercept and then a minus 30% incoming. Then on top of that, you get a school pip for ice, and then the shadow pact is you'll have to have shields on yourself, and per round it'll take away 1 shield. Whenever you do not have a shield, it will take away 5% of your max HP, and this will last 3 rounds, of course. So you just need to have 3 rounds worth of shields on you, and hopefully they don't get removed. But this is a really strong buff, and it makes ice more viable. Of course, we'll have to see how the shadow gauge gets changed, if it does, right? We're all hoping. So like whenever I do make my community response video, a lot of people are asking the same thing. We want the shadow gauge to be semi-changed, so it's more consistent, or a constant factor, whether it, instead of it being an RNG factor. But very good change for Sentinel. And then we do have the Shatter creature. This will be used to combine with the original ice spells to create them once again to shads. So what the Shatter creature is doing is it's doing 75 shadow damage, which is similar to a natural attack. And then it's putting 3 tower shields on you, and they're minus 50%, of course. And then the pact is the enemy has to have blades. So per round, it'll take away a blade and give you make it so it'll make it so you don't lose 5% of your max HP. Every time there's a round the enemy does not have a blade, it will take away your HP. So that's something to keep in mind. That doesn't mean every time you clear a blade you'll get shields. No, it doesn't work like that. The reward is a set stone one-time thing, and then you just have to pay the price for 3 rounds straight, whether it be your health or whatever hanging effect is required for the shadow pack. Very straightforward system. Don't really have to explain too much of that, but I've already explained in previous videos. Whenever I talk about my storm teasers, we'll definitely go way more in depth, but trying to keep it semi-consistent so we don't spend like too long on these videos, because I know they get kind of long and lengthy in the process. But both of these are really good. I'm really looking forward to that new Shadow Sentinel and how we're going to be using it. It definitely puts ice on the standpoint of, hey, I am a tank and I will, literally define the ability of me being a tank. So this is actually giving some viability to ice in certain strategies, and I'm looking forward to it. Honestly, I am all for it, because in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, when it comes to advanced combat like raids, challenge mode, rematches, I don't really look for an ice wizard. I really don't. In majority of the time, it's like, hey, if I need a support, I'll get a life wizard. Maybe I'll get a death wizard. Maybe I'll get a balance wizard, because they have utility in their in their arsenal, right? Death can do dark packs and whatnot, and then they can also, what's it called, V-plague. Life can heal. Balance has the ability to give you blades, pretty straightforward. So everyone has its own unique things, but ice just doesn't really have anything. Like, yes, it has Legion Shield, but the thing is, we don't really Legion Shield due to the fact is, if you can V-plague, you're just gonna V-plague over a tower shield or even a Legion Shield, because majority of these bosses, mobs, whatnot, even raid bosses have so much pierce, so there's no real reason to shield when you can just v-plague. I'm hoping in the future we do not get a thing where we get select target Legion Shield and select target v-plague. That is something I don't want in the foreseeable future, but it's something that can happen, and it's something I think about. And if that does happen, that will really make challenge mode and rematches and whatnot and raids very, very different. I will say quite different, because a lot of people rely on certain things like that. So let's talk about how combining and everything whatnot works. Now that we talked about shadow packs, let's talk about the current A-bomb that exists in the game. So if we go venture back into the actual game, let's go over to A-bomb right here. Now currently A-bomb is doing 790 through 910 ice damage, and then it puts a minus 50% shield on you. And then if you had the challenge mode variation and whatnot, it's a 455 ice damage hit, and then it puts 2 chromatic shields based upon who you're fighting. So basically, if I'm fighting an ice wizard, we're just going to use ice for example, that's kind of what I've been doing for all these spells at this point, but if I'm fighting an ice wizard, it would put minus 70% ice shields and put 2 of them. If I'm fighting a death wizard, it would put minus 70% death shields and whatnot. And I know some people are going to be like, well, what if I'm fighting a boss that has 2 schools? Whatever their left school is that's their main school. So if it's like a ice death boss for some reason, it's going to be ice shields, not death shields. It's not going to do ice and death. It's always been just the leftmost school, so I'm pretty sure they would just keep it consistent, but that's what it is currently in game. And now let's venture into how the fusion system works and whatnot, and basically what it'll look like in game. So here is what it looks like. So currently, as you guys can see in the image, there's the current paths that exist in the game, and then below is what it'll look like in your deck or in your combat whenever you're selecting a card, whenever you have Dark Sentinel in your hand as well as an A-bomb, just for this example, right? And it'll be glowing green, just like how fusions tend to work, right? Same system applies. And then you have the new paths and the shadow fusion. So the new paths, what it's doing is A-bomb is basically getting a big nerf. That's basically, well, I mean, you are losing the shad, so of course, and they're getting rebalances. So A-bomb is doing 385 damage, and then it proceeds to put a tower shield. And then if you want the advanced combat variation, well, technically these are both allowed, but predominantly people are going to be using the other one for certain things. But anyways, the other path of A-bomb is doing 375, but you can gambit up to three traps on the enemy, and per trap you gambit, you get a minus 75 chromatic shield. So if I'm fighting an ice, I would get a minus 75% ice shield. Now of course, if I gambit up to 3 traps, I can get 3 minus 75% ice shields. That's just an example if I was fighting an ice mob or whatnot. So that's what the new path is looking like. Then we have the fusion variation, which the new fusion variation, which is the one that's PvP banned, is doing 1.1k. So this is actually stronger than the original A-bomb, and then it puts a shield on you, just a regular old tower shield. And then the shadow pact is you will need traps on the enemy. So per round, it will take away a trap on the enemy up to 3 rounds. If you do not have a trap, it's going to take 5% of your max HP. So you're starting off at 0%, and every time you fail a pact, you lose 5% of your max HP. So just remember that. And then we have the advanced combat / PvP allowed variation of A-bomb, which is doing 730, which is stronger than the original A-bomb still. And then 3 minus 80% tower shield, well, not tower shields, chromatic shields. And like I said earlier, if you're fighting an ice wizard, that's 380% ice shields. If I'm fighting a fire wizard or a storm wizard, that's going to be 3 shields corresponding to their school that are all minus 80%. Very, very strong. I mean, it's similar to the original A-bomb in a sense, but the damage is way higher. And on top of that, the shields are 10% strong, and you get an additional shield. So this A-bomb is quite strong for that aspect. But the shadow pact is you do need traps on the enemy. So just keep that in mind. Every time you don't have a trap on the enemy, you will lose 5% of your max HP. You're starting off at 0. I think a lot of people get this construed thinking that you're starting off at 15 and you're actually going down, when it's the opposite. You're starting off at 0, and every time you fail a pact, you lose HP. So that's how the system works, and that's how shadow packs are currently working. So of course, if if you wanted to fuse these, for example, you can choose the outcome of your fusion. So let's just say I wanted the right variation of the shadow version or the shadow fusion of A-bomb. You can combine the 385 ice damage A-bomb, which is just 385 and a tower shield, and I can combine that with Dark Sentinel, and it will create the fusion on the right side of the shadow fusion, because you can kind of just select which fusion outcome you want. That's like the good thing about this. You're not locked into a certain pathway. You can kind of choose which one you want, which is very good, and I kind of like that from a chaos perspective. And of course, with the colors and whatnot, I'm pretty sure everyone's kind of realized this. With the whole fusion and stuff like that, the card slightly gets adjusted, like the artwork. You guys can see it has like that shadowy effect on it. It's like ice combined with shadow, kind of like how weaving spells are, but in this way it's like more of a shadow-esque thing. And you can see the card is like semi deteriorated to show that it has like cracks in it and stuff like that, to show that, hey, this is fused, yo, this is fused. So very good job from the art team. I actually really like the shadow design. I've kind of mentioned this in previous videos. It looks really nice. But there is that, and that's kind of how the fusion system slash shadow pack stuff works, and we're going to continue with that moving forward, and that kind of just sets the stone for the rest of the video of how this system works. Very straightforward system, and I mean, hey, if not, I will be making videos later down the line. We'll have a tutorial system in test realm, and I will do a video talking about that and explaining all that stuff, so be on the lookout for that. If you guys have made it this far into the video, just wanted to remind you guys that 75% of you guys that watch me on a daily basis are not subscribed. So do me a huge favor and subscribe. We're on that grind to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. All right, now let's get back into the rest of the video. But let's start our way with Snowball Barrage. So currently, Snowball Barrage, what it does in game, if we find it right here, I maxed here with a shad pip, and it's an X amount of pip spell, so meaning depending on how many pips you have depends on how much damage you're doing. So per pip you have at maxed here, it was doing 115 per pip, and it was an AoE. Very strong. People were using Snowball Barrage on ice wizards all the time. I feel like ALH, for example, Lionheart, whenever we do his solo fights, remember I would always see this man throw out a Snowball Barrage left, right, and center. So yeah, it's a fun spell to use for ice, I would say. And Path B, which I'll be honest, I didn't see much use, but it was doing 545 ice damage, and it was doing 40% universal traps, and of course this was 6 pips. It had an actual static pip value on it, and it was a shad, and it was a select target as well, so you can select multiple targets and whatnot, which is doing 65 damage per pip. Now honestly, I think I did the math on this. This is good. It's actually stronger than your blizzards or whatnot. This is actually better than those. So if you're trying to use round 1 blizzard, it's actually better to use Snowball Barrage instead round 1. But once you get your Wallaroo AoE, you're not going to be using Snowball Barrage. Now, I know someone's going to ask, what if I want to use it round 2? Well, round 2, it's actually better to just use Frost Giant. It's just, the 7 pip AoEs are just really strong, and if they ever nerf it, I know the community will get quite upset on a lot of changes. So yeah, if you want to use Snowball Barrage round 2, you don't want to. It's actually better to use Frost Giant instead. And then of course, whenever you get to Wallaroo, it's better to just use the Wallaroo AoE round 1 instead of using Snowball Barrage. So Snowball Barrage will be good for certain niche things, but once you get above like 11 pips in value, I think it's like 11 or 13 or whatnot, don't remember exactly on the top of my head. Actually, just double check. Technically, if you have 10 pips, Snowball Barrage is better than Frost Giant. So if for some reason you have 10 pips, it's better to use Snowball Barrage. It does more damage than a max tier Frost Giant. So hey, putting that out there if you ever want to use Snowball Barrage. But there's other things that we can talk about later in this video that might change your opinion on certain things. So there's that. So Snowball Barrage, good change. Honestly, good change. And then we do have the Path B, which is clearing. It is clearing 5 negative charms. In return, you get 40% shields, and then it does 465 ice damage. Now, honestly, I think it depends on how you view it. It really depends on how you view it. But this is just really a, I guess you can say a similar version to King Art. Now, King Art, it's 8 pips, it clears up to 7 negative charms, but in return you get chromatic shields, which are minus 60%, while Snowball Barrage is just giving you minus 40%. So this is kind of like a slightly toned down version of King Art, but it gives you that option. You know, for example, if you wanted to use path A King Art instead, and you can pack path B Snowball barrages, that's something you can do. But we'll have to see how players take this, because personally I'm kind of like, I wish it gave, if it gave traps, I feel like it would be too similar to another spell. But I feel like traps could have been an option here, realistically. That's just my opinion. Or yeah, I don't know what else they could do, but that's just my take. Not, it's kind of like meh, because King Art exists and King Art clears more, does more damage, and gives you better shields for 2 pips of value. But that's my take right now currently on Snowball Barrage. And then of course we have the Shadow enhanced variations, where you combine it with Dark Sentinel, when you can kind of choose whatever outcome you want for Snowball Barrage depending on what you choose in your spell writing, of course. But path A at max tier is doing 135 damage per pip, and this is stronger than the original Snowball Barrage that currently exists in the game. At max tier, the original Snowball Barrage is doing 111, while this is doing 135, which is very good. So let's just say round 1 you get a Shad, and you're like, oh, I can use my Snowball Barrage. And it's doing 675 damage. Now this is literally stronger than Frost Giant. So this is stronger than Frost Giant, but on top of that, it is stronger than you know, your Waller AoEs and whatnot. So if for some reason you get a round 1 Shad and you do want to fuse it with Dark Sentinel, yeah, you can use Snowball Barrage, and it's doing 675 at max tier per pip, and that's not even enchanting it. If you can enchant it, well, which you can be, when you enchant it, it will be doing 975, and then on top of that, if you have item card epic, then at that point it's going to do 990 damage on round 1. So still very strong if you do rock an item card epic. So just putting that out there. And then of course the Shadow Pact is you will need negative charms on yourself. If not, you will be losing 5% of your max HP per round and whatnot. So that's something to remember when it comes to using the Snowball Barrage, but very strong Snowball Barrage, I will have to say. And then we do have the path B variation, which is doing 770 ice damage, and then it proceeds to give you 3 60% universal shields, and then it clears a negative charm off of you per round, so up to 3 rounds, of course. Now even then, I think it's still okay at this. Okay, well, it's okay. The thing is, just King Art is just too strong. Then like maybe they need to like reevaluate that. Then I don't know. The King Art, if just using King Art instead of instead of Path B Snowball Barrage is just better, because you can clear up to 7 and you get a shield per clear. While you can get, like, let's say you had 7 negative charms, King Art will give you 7 chromatic shields. Snowball Barrage will only clear 3 negative charms and give you 3, I guess you're getting 3 universal shields. I guess that's the difference. You're getting 3 universal shields that are minus 60%. And you honestly are doing more damage. So maybe if you only want to clear up to 3, but remember, it will only clear 1 per round, while King Art's doing it instantly before the hit. So it's clearing the negative charms, then it's giving you the shields, and then it's doing damage. While Snowball Barrage at Path B Fusion is doing damage, then proceeds to give you the shield, and then per round it'll only clear 1 up to 3. So not too much a fan of that. I mean, you guys can let me know, but for PvE players, I'd say you're eating good with Snowball Barrage, in my opinion. Both variations, the fusion variation as well as path A. Path A is good if you want to use it round 1 till you get to Wallaroo, but then if you do have the shadow variation, you are honestly, if you get a round 1 shad, you're doing so much damage, especially if you have an epic. You can do 990 damage round 1, right? And this is with an item card epic. So just putting it out there, you guys, Ice Wizards, are eating pretty good when it comes to Snowball Barrage. That's just my opinion. Now let's move on to Mirage spells, which in this case would be Clima. I call it Clima. You guys can call it whatever you want. I feel like for the longest I called it Cataclysmic for some reason. But yeah, no, I don't want to talk about it, but we'll call it Clima. Anyways, Clima, what it does currently in game, if we go right here, is doing 780 or 700. I was about to say 780, 755 ice damage, and it's divided to well, the more enemies you select, it'll divide it. So of course, if you select up to 4 targets, it's doing 25% of its original value on each target, which is pretty bad. So that's why divides are I'm not really a fan of. And then we do have the path B, which is doing 325 ice damage, and then it puts 2 chromatic ice or two chromatic shields on you that are minus 70%. So if you are fighting ice wizard, just as an example, it would put minus 70% ice shields, and it would put 2 of them. So that's just an example of what it would do. But the new Clima is not doing that at all. It's being switched from shields to now being traps. So the new Clima that does not have a shad is doing 230 ice damage, and then it gives you basically an ice feint. Yeah, so another high percentage trap that's just allowed. We're just gonna toss that out there, and you can select this on multiple targets. I would assume, I mean, I could be wrong on this, but from an assumption point of view, I think the more targets you select, I assume the trap is gonna get lowered. If it doesn't, well, that's just an easy trap that you can put on all enemies for 4 pips. Just say forget the damage and just put a minus 60 or put a 60% feint basically on all targets, which is very good if that's possible, but I'm pretty sure it would just like lower the value, if I remember. And then we do have the path B of Clima, which is doing 295 ice damage, and then you can gambit 2 negative charms for literally a 70% trap. So this is honestly, this one's pretty good too. You can literally just toss out a lot of ice spells, for example, just put weaknesses half the time. I know it's not as potent as other schools, for example, but the fact is you can just, you know, use something and then just literally gambit those negative charms. It doesn't have to be weaknesses, it can be just any sort of negative charm, and then proceed to put 70% traps. And this can put 2, so if you gambit 2 weaknesses or negative charms, you can put 2 70% traps on the enemy. So that's something to be worried about. And now we have the shadow fusion variation of Clima, where you combine it with Dark Sentinel, and at path A max tier, what it's doing is 1040 damage. Yeah. And then the shadow pact is you gotta have negative charms on the enemy. So if there's no negative charm on the enemy, it will lose, or you will lose 5% of your max HP per round. So you're starting off at 0. Every time you fail a pact, you will lose 5% of your max HP. So that's a thing. We're just gonna do 1040. So it just loses trap, and now it does damage. And then you have path B variation of the fusion, which is 565 ice damage, and then it puts 365 ice traps on the enemy. And the shadow pact is you will need negative charms on the enemy. Now honestly, in my opinion, I don't think I'm gonna be using either variation of Clima on the shadow fusion variations. I think just base Clima, if I had to pick, base Clima is just, in my opinion, better. I mean, the thing is with path B fusion, you're getting just 3 traps right away, and it will remove a negative charm on the enemy per round, so it will remove 3. But when in return you can just gambit 2, and in return you can get 70 traps. Well, that's just doing it instantly versus the shadow pact is doing it per round. It's only removing 1 per round. So the thing is, if that enemy removes it within that time frame, you're just going to lose your HP instead. So I think for Clima's sake, I would probably pick between path A and path B regular. I wouldn't really use the shadow fusion in my opinion, but that's just my opinion currently. It can change after time, you know, time tells, but I still think, and I've said this in my previous videos as well, I just think the Mirage spell should just be 4 pip AoEs. I know people are gonna be like, well, they're just gonna be exactly the same value as like Blizzard, Meteor, whatnot. Thing is though, not everyone has access to a 4 pip AoE, other than, like, for example, Life doesn't, Death doesn't, and Storm technically doesn't. Yes, you can argue Life and Death, they do get lore spells that are AoEs, for example, like Deer Knight, Ship of Fools, whatnot, and then Life has Rat Spin. But the thing is, if you don't do outside stuff, you don't get access to a 4 pip AoE that's simple. So that's just kind of my opinion with those spells. It's just I really wish that they're 4 pip AoEs, and these are easier to tier up in my opinion, instead of doing event spell element stuff, because the only way to getting advanced elements currently is just by doing Beast Moon and whatnot, which I'm not too much of a fan of. I really miss Portal Peril. I really do. So I guess it's like a temporary fix, but I don't know. That's just current my opinion. I will talk about it in a separate video. But yeah, when it comes to Clima, I think just the regular variation of Clima is better than the Shadow Pact variation. So now let's move on to the next spell, which is Shatterhorn. Now, Shatterhorn, what it currently does in game, and remember, Shatterhorn is one of those spells that go from 5 pips to 6 pips to 7 pips, and at max tier it was doing 1025 through 1145 ice damage, and it would taunt the enemy for 3 rounds. Yeah, it was a taunt, so you can just toss that out. And then you had Path B, which is doing 460 ice damage, and then it would proceed to put 2 weaknesses that are minus 35%. It wasn't chromatic or anything, it was just 2 weaknesses. Now, the new variation of Shatterhorn that does not have a shad is 5 pips. So they are making Shatterhorn a 5 pip spell. And at max tier, it's doing 345 ice damage, and then it's a taunt for 2 rounds. So instead of it being 3 rounds, now it's 2 rounds. This is just mega taunt in a way, but instead it's a hit and mega taunt. Yeah, I mean it's banned, of course. You're not gonna be able to use it anyways, in advanced combat, whatnot. But still, that exists. And then we do have the Path B variation, which is doing 355 ice damage, and then it gambits a trap, so up to 3 traps, and it puts a minus 40% weakness on the target. Now, of course, you guys have to remember, this is Shatterhorn without a shad, and on top of that, this is now a 5 pip variation. It's no longer the 7 pip. Now, of course, the Path B has always been 5 pips, so it is losing damage. But in return, you're putting more utility on the enemy, in the sense of you're getting another weakness. So if you do gambit 3 traps, you are putting 3 minus 40%. Well, currently the Shatterhorn in game, what it does is just does damage, and then it just puts the 2 weaknesses by default without you having to gambit. But that's the shadow variation. But let's move on to Shatterhorn. That's the shad enhanced variation with the fusion and whatnot, and it'll kind of make up the stuff that we're talking about. So Shatterhorn Path A, if you can, of course, if you combine any version of Shatterhorn and you combine it with Dark Sentinel, if you're looking at the Shadow Fusion of Shatterhorn, that's Path A, Tier 3, it's doing 1130. Now, if we're looking at the in-game variation of Shatterhorn that currently exists in the game, it's doing 1025 through 1145, while this one's doing 1130. I think they should have slightly buffed the damage on this, just so it matches, because all the other schools they got net like complete buffs for their spells, at least the ones that we've seen. I don't know what fire looks like, and you'll see what storm looks like later on Sunday. But I think this should have been a buff slightly. I think it should have been 1145 at max tier, or slightly more. That is just my opinion, because like if we're comparing it to the 5 pip variation of Shatterhorn that exists in game, it's doing 790 to 910. Now if we're comparing 5 pip to 5 pip, yeah, of course this is way stronger than the original Shatterhorn that's just 5 pips. But you do lose that taunt value from 3 rounds to now 2 rounds. So there is that. And of course the Shadow Pact is you gotta have traps on the enemy. So if you don't have traps on the enemy, you'll lose 5% of your max HP per round. So just remember that. And then we do have the Path B variation of Shatterhorn, which is doing 675 damage, and then it proceeds to put 3 weaknesses on the enemy that are minus 45%. So of course this is stronger than the current Shatterhorn that exists in the game. It is doing more damage. It's doing a good chunk more damage. So it went from 460 to now 675, and then you're putting 3 weaknesses instead of 2. So there's that. So it's putting minus 45% instead of minus 30% or 35%. And on top of that, there is a Shadow Pact tied to it, which is having traps on the enemy. So to a certain extent, you can argue on Shatterhorn on how you feel. I think people might lean towards, I mean, this is kind of early to tell, but I feel like people are going to lean towards the regular Shatterhorn Path B, just so you can gambit traps, because you're at least doing it at that instant. While I feel like with the Shadow Packs, it being 1 per round, I feel like depends on the utility that it's removing. In this case, it's removing a trap on itself, on the enemy per round. It's gonna be kind of annoying, just because if we're trying to set up certain things. But if the enemy has so much traps on them, it doesn't really matter in that aspect. But we'll have to see. I don't know. Shatterhorn and And Clima, I'm not too much of a fan of when it comes to their shadow fusions. I don't know. You guys let me know, you know, you guys, your ice mains and, you know, all the ice mains, let me know what you guys think of Shatterhorn and Clima. I don't know. I'm not too much of a fan at the moment. Snowball Barrage, I like for what it is. Clima, I'm not too much fan of the fusion, but I do like the path B where it's just gambiting. And then Shatterhorn, I feel like it's too early to tell. Yeah, I gotta see what the new fights look like before I kind of lean towards it. But so far, those are my takes currently. And then finally, let's move on to the next controversial spell that people are probably wondering what is going to happen to it, which is Freeze Ray. Now, Freeze Ray is another staple on ice, and I've seen people use it while questing and whatnot too, because of the 7-pip variation. And I actually have it as a 7-pip variation as well, because if I ever get a shad for some weird reason, and this is very rare, I only do this on my ice wizard because of the fact is ice's damage is just so low. And I've already made build guides on the channel and what my recommendation is on certain builds, and ice's damage is kind of low because I choose 50% pierce. If you choose 50% pierce, your damage is going to be low. So for that aspect, I choose to pack a freeze ray on the off chance I get a shad, because this will just be my better option to use instead of using frost giant, because this is doing 850 through 940, and you can use this round 2. Now of course, if I want to wait till round 3, of course I'll have the max tier variation of freeze ray, but I purposely keep it at tier 2. But at max tier, if you had it at 8 pips and whatnot, it's doing 940 to 1040. And then Path B variation of Freeze Ray is doing 545 ice damage, and then proceeds to do minus 30% weakness, which is just 2 of them. Now, this is just really oddly similar to Shatterhorn, and honestly, it needed to be changed. Well, this one's a select target. This one isn't, it's just a single target. While this one's doing 460, this was doing 545. I mean, you are increasing the pip, of course, and the difference is this is minus 35% weaknesses, while this is minus 30% weaknesses. So I had 2 similar things, which honestly it had to be different at this point. Now if we look at the new freeze ray at max tier, it's doing 455 ice damage. Now let me put this in perspective of another spell that you guys know and use and whatnot. Let's take Count Crocula as an example. Count Crocula, it's 3 pips and it's school pip with the myth pip. So 5 pips in reality, right? It's doing 425 at tier 4, and we'll eventually get our tier 5s and it'll be even stronger. That you can do Count Crocula round 1 and you're just chilling and you'll be doing good solid damage. This is very equivalent to Freeze Ray. But if you wanted to wait one more round, you can just use Frost Giant, which is doing 615, while Freeze Ray is doing 455, which is, yeah, it's not too great for you Ice Wizards when it comes to Freeze Ray. So, and it honestly kind of sucks. So, there's that. But the Path B, I will say, that Path B is actually pretty solid. Now, what Path B does, it's clearing 5 negative charms and then converting them into weaknesses on the target. And then it does 460. So basically, Ice just got its own Stone Colossus. Yeah. So I'm completely all for that. And honestly, that's a really good change. Ice has their own variation of Stone Colossus now. And Stone Colossus is 6 pips, I remember. So yeah, you literally got your own Stone Colossus. So I think this is a good change for Path B, but for Path A, yeah, it kind of sucks. But for Path B, it's pretty good. Honestly, it's pretty good. Now we can move on to the Shadow Fusion variation of Freeze Ray. And still, I'm not too sure yet, but we'll talk about it. But Freeze Ray at max tier for Path A, if you have the Shadow Fusion, if you combine any Freeze Ray with the Dark Sentinel, and you chose Path A max tier as your outcome, it's doing 940. And then on top of that, it is the Shadow Pact is negative charms on yourself. So this is technically the same as if you're running a 7-pip variation of Freeze Ray. Freeze Ray currently in game, if you have the 7-pip variation with the Shadow Pip, at If you hit the highest end, it's doing 940, while this new freeze rate is just doing 940 by default. So still, I'm don't know. I really don't know. I feel like the other spells are just better. But yeah, you can have path A freeze rate if you want to. Yeah, if you, yeah, as an option. But path B, which I'm kind of a fan of, which is doing 775 ice damage, and then it puts 2 weaknesses on the target, which are minus 45%, and then it clears weaknesses on you 1 per round. Honestly, I like this variation of freeze rate, and I do like the variation of the freeze rate, which is without the shadow fusion. I think the one that's without the shadow fusion is just really strong. I think that one's really good. It's just stone but for ice, and then you can enhance it with the shadow pip, and instead you'll get 2 weaknesses on the target instead of a weakness per clear. But these weaknesses are stronger for it, so I think they're both justified to that experience. But I do like Path B freeze ray for the Shadow Pact variation, and I do like Path B freeze ray for the stone variation. It's just a stone colossus, so I will say. But those are my takes when it comes to all the ice spells. A mixed bag, I will say. Some spells I like, some spells I didn't like, of course, and you guys saw me talk about them. I think Sentinel, really good spell. I think the Shadow Creature's a really good spell as well. I think the Snowball Barrage, good change. At least people can use it for a set period of time while they're questing, and then once they get their Waller Root AoE, they'll probably just swap to that. But if you do have the Shadow Pip and you actually do get semi-consistent shads, then it's actually worth using Snowball Barrage to that extent. Clima, I was about to say Cataclysm. Clima is good for its Path B, it's just regular variation, not the Shadow Fusion variation. Just the regular Clima Path B is really good. And then as well as I do like Freeze Ray's Path B, just being a similar stone, and I do like the Shadow Pact variation of Freeze Ray for its Path B as well. So literally a mixed bag, and I'm kind of all for it when it comes to ice changes. But that's all my thoughts and opinions. You guys let me know what you guys think of the spells in the comments down below. Have some discussions, of course, what you guys think of all the ice spells. And that's just my honest take when it comes to spells. But that is it for me, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.